definition, memorize a whole set of series of words, define a concept, like I said at the beginning, how you apply something impacts how you manage it, right? So it's really important that you define clearly. So with that, how do we go about? So I know GANST, obviously. It's really for you guys to figure it out. So I want to be more interactive, basically. Ask you guys, what is that resistance? So that's the question number one, right? So what is you should know by now, right? It's defined as what?
Subsector.
Okay, so they're defined as interrelated subsectors that are formally and informally connected to each other, right? So the interaction is defined as a value chain, right? And so basically it's saying that no man lives on an island, we're all connected one way or another. So how do we think about these relationships given this concept? So you can literally take this one definition and blow it up. How do you define those relationships between the member supply chain? Given what you know so far. So we've got supply chain, right? The supply chain, the buyers, suppliers, right? Distributors, producers, and so on, right? How do we define those relationships? What conceptual frameworks have we gone through that inform us in terms of understanding the relationships? This is the kind of integrated aspects of concepts, right? So remember in the IO approach to ag, right? If you're a commodity producer, corn producer, right, and you're selling to the downstream grain processing market, what's that relationship like? What's the market structure like? Are you selling to a whole bunch of grain processors? No. So it's going to be few, right? Not a lot, but few. So you're selling to, remember the CR4 ratio, right? It's 80%. Top four players control 80% of the market. So when you think about the relationships between the farmer producing the processor being the buyer, right? How would you define that relationship? So it's few. Okay, your price taker, likely you might be taken advantage of, right? It's that because they're in a position of influence, they're not likely to give you a fair price. So what would we call that? How do we define that relationship? 5 horses? Are the supply chain 5 horses? Okay. Let's get through that. So grain processor is going to negotiate, trying to get every penny out of you, right? And you can only sell to 3 of these major guys. What do we call that? Processor being the buyer. Exactly, right? So they're going to buy power. So when we think about the definition of agribusiness, it's a system of relationships. Well, how do we understand those relationships? 5 horses in one of them, right? So we've got front buy, supply power. So that helps us understand the relationship. It's certainly not much of anything. And I don't know how to look at the papers that are submitted to me, but the optional term paper, a lot of the emphasis in that is the importance of strategic alliances, partnerships, right? So those are helping us understand. We also talked about these formal and informal connections. So in our context, what are these formal exchanges? How do we find them? Contracts, right? So we talk about IO approach to ag, those are contracts, and those contracts are defined in terms of set price, set quantity, set time of delivery, set who owns the product, through the transition to that supply chain, right? Okay? What about the informal relationships? What's that? Handshake. So specifically, a handshake implies what? No, in fact, it's you often use that in the absence of multi-time contract, right? Just have a handshake. There's no written terms of agreement, right? Good faith, right? So it implies trust, right? So what do we call that? That kind of shape relationship.
Informal.
Okay, that's how we define it. But what theoretical perspective would we have in terms of explaining that? No? just talked about it 2 days ago. Talk about resource phase 3, right? Right? And those the certain things in the resource phase are very different from replicate. Just trust something different from replicate. By expansion here. So we call that trust social in the resource phase view. Okay, let's see. Social. Second to last three pages.
Social contracts.
Social complexity. Okay, alright? So now you can see that when we define this simple term, we're going to really break it down and understand it based on the things we've covered so far. I'm sure I could go a little further on that. But anyways, that's the mindset I want you to start with. Because the exam is integrated. It requires you to put the pieces together. Right? So one of the distinguishing characteristics of ag, I'm just going to narrow all of them simply that I want to spend this time on, is that ag is one of these food products in which your culture impacts what you eat. Right? What was an example? What were the cases that we used to reflect that? What's that?
The pork.
The pork, the meatball, right? And so clearly, dietary restrictions, or some of these are religiously defined, impact your consumption. And that is pretty obvious, right? People are different, come from different backgrounds and different things. But what are the issues surrounding that in terms of the management of that aspect? Any problems with that?
That's the difference between different countries and stuff like that.
Okay, so is that a problem? People have different preferences.
I mean, if you adapt your company, I mean, like McDonald's will do a good job in Asia compared to America, not the same food, but they're still a very highly sought after company. So it kind of depends on how you manage
Okay.
your menu.
So if I'm gonna introduce a sausage, ham, bacon, breakfast sandwich in the Middle East,
Not the problem.
that's gonna be a problem, right? So when you recognize the cultural aspects, not just that people are different, that's pretty obvious. The question is how do you manage that difference? We also talked about the biological basis of production. So we've got, things like climate change that impact weight gain for animals as well as yields. We also talked about a bit of technology that's involved in biotech, right? CRISPR, okay? That has the impact in terms of the functioning of the supply chain. So I doubted the supply chain. Then we also talked about we started talking about the competitive structure of the industry. And so we start saying, hey, the competitive structure is not competitive. It's based on a highly concentrated market structure, and we spent a whole section of notes on that. Okay, so that kind of builds that up a bit. Then we also talked about the role of education in terms of agribusiness, and so kind of we had this exercise for you guys to kind of define who you are in terms of what skills you offer to the marketplace, right? Relative to your peers, right? And so what was that? Problem solving, right? So we go back 3 lectures ago. We talked about how we can think about that from the standpoint of the IO framework, okay? In terms of using your value added as ability to solve problems, application, proven theories to address different problems. That's the value added, okay? So all of those are very different from agribusiness, from economists, because our purpose is to do what? Not only solve problems for who? Specifically.
Make money for the firm.
For the firm. We're not interested, that's not our prime interest, we're not interested in maximizing social welfare. That's not our job. We're not training you to work in a government position for this one. Okay, that's not what this is about. Okay, so then with that, we talked about the concept of strategy. It's clearly a firm level concept, so very quickly how do we define it? And why is it necessarily a process? Or give me an example of a strategy that we talk about that reflects that position. We're going to talk about an example of strategy. So, okay, we'll just work with that one, right? So what is that? Okay. Any examples of cases where that happened? Socrates, right? clearly, and again, we had a whole discussion on Starbucks on Friday, right? But, you know, a lot of that discussion was built after the fact, the out of control stuff started. But generally, when we think about strategy, the definition of operating an idea of Howard Schultz idea, he came on from, right? He was supposed to go to Milan to attend a international houseware conference. That was the intended strategy, and instead, the idea of Starbucks came. This idea of bringing this home away from home idea to the United States, back to strategy. That's the idea. So we also said, okay, well, in that case, it was generally successful. But generally speaking, though, strategy is also a process as a result of that definition. And why? You'll fail, right? Because strategy is an idea, right? And the idea is not always right. Sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't. In Starbucks' case, they did, right? In other cases, they certainly don't. So when we talk about the process, the Mintzberg model comes into play. It spells out the model of how we think about strategy as a process. So defining the concept impacts the subsequent process in terms of the Mintzberg model. So these are the two related things. So the concept of strategy is possible to do successfully. So how do we think about success? The rest on the terms of competitive advantage. So very quickly, what is that? Okay, so almost there. So it's a relative concept. Okay, these are the actions or resources of the firm that generate above normal returns, that generate returns that are over and beyond that of the competitor. Okay, so when we think of competitive advantage, we've got to have the same. It's not just different, which is what you're saying, but there has to be something that's different that matters in terms of performance. And our concern is that we're not just interested in having competitive advantage that makes you different and better than other people for a given period of time. We're looking at a performance that is sustainable over time. Okay? And so you can think about this notion of competitive advantage rests in the firm's resources, right? So when you think about the tail end of the class, the resource base is precisely about what that is, right? It's very systematic, identifying what is a firm's competitive advantage based on the attributes value, rare, costly, material organization. Okay? And ultimately, what impacts long-term sustainability for the resource-based view would be assets that are what? Again? And what's an example of that? So again, our concern is what to be successful. How do we do that? That's our competitive advantage. Well, what does that entail? The resource-based view. How do we develop competitive advantage and sustainability?
Like KFC's recipe.
Okay, and that the reason being, in terms of the resource-based view, the reason being is what?
Like it's hard to get that blend with their research that they have.
Okay, so for the resource base, we would call that.
Right.
No. Because remember, in that case, in the KFC case, the recipe is the resource, right? Value is assuming that people like fried chicken, right? It's rare because they have 11 special herbs and spices. It's special, therefore it's rare. But what makes it difficult to replicate is because what? What's that? It's a question of imitability, right? It's highly costly to imitate because why? In that case, it's a secret. It's locked in the safe, and then all the CEOs need 2 keys and all this kind of stuff. The supply chain members only know little portions of the recipe, not the entire one, right? So when we think about that context, the resource base informs us in terms of what is it that makes advantage. We also talked about how we can embody the concept of strategy within the context of the firm's mission statements. So what mission statements are we talking about?
Starbucks and Chick-fil-A.
Starbucks and Chick-fil-A, right? So clearly those are belief systems, right? And for those that are presenting on Friday, the belief system for Starbucks was to be the most respected brand name in the world, right? That's a very different belief system for Chick-fil-A, which was to do what?
Serve God.
Would serve God and glorify God, right? Completely different belief system. And so then we talked about the Mintzberg model. You go through that model yourself. But ultimately, we were thinking about, okay, how do we develop a strategy that's successful? It's based on SWOT, meaning that you can leverage what you're good at with the spectrum of opportunities. The question here in this class is SWOT is pretty easy to understand. Anyone can do it. Took us a whole semester to go through it, right? So how do we now develop a successful strategy given what you know? So let's just start with the most basic one, right? If you want to be successful, the basic terms of strategy is Leverage what you're good at and respect external opportunities. In the context of the class that we've taken so far, how do we do that?
SWOT analysis.
Yeah, but that's what SWOT helps us do. I'm saying now let's break it down. How do we leverage strengths that respond to external opportunities? How do we define those strengths? Strengths are not simply going to be something you're good at, right? It's going to be far more than that. Okay, so how do we define that? How do we define a strength? From the resource-based view. Okay, that's that question of value, right? But is it going to be enough? Is that enough for a strength? And rare, right? It's got to be something that addresses a need that's not available by others. Is that enough? Anyway, so what is a strength is developing assets available rather than rare and cost saving. Now, what about the opportunities? How do I understand opportunities? Given that we have assets that have those three attributes, develop those. How do we then define opportunities? What's happening in this class? Okay, so sure, that's from the consumer side. That's fine, that's marketing. Okay, but what about from the supplier side? How do we find opportunities from the supplier standpoint? This entire second example. So with SWOT analysis, right? Each of these components we've gone through, specific strengths and weaknesses really be explained by resource-based view, right? How to explain the opportunities. What's that? SCP approach, right? So how to define the opportunities market is defined by at least one variable from the players in the market, right? Of course, they will include basic conditions like supply and demand, right? So we already can think about SWOT analysis in much more sophisticated form than we currently have when we first started. Okay? There's some limitations of the SWOT analysis, largely because we have to rank all the strengths and weaknesses, right? To solve that problem in some space. Okay, so then we continue to say, okay, how do we go about, since strategy is concerned about performance, how do we go about measuring performance? So performance in multiple approaches is very consistent with the characterization of advanced risk in terms of production, right? And as a result, the way we go about measuring should be like that, okay? So I'm not going to go through all of these, okay, but just pick up a few of these, right? So we think about, let's pick performance signal. There's something you guys talked about, okay? So what is that? What's the premise behind the multiple stakeholder? Which we talked about? Yes. Okay. So who's the stakeholder here in this case? Right. And the customers, but primarily for taking if I recall, were you the group that wanted more employee training, more wages? Someone talked about that. You guys, right? So the premise there is that, look, those employees are key stakeholders, which if you don't treat them well, treat them as valued constituents, then you don't have a Starbucks, because Starbucks is based on employees in part, right? Because that's what provides that premium service, right? So the multiple stakeholder approach addresses the performance from the standpoint of assessing their value needs from the standpoint of these constituents. But a lot of discussions surrounding a lot of approaches in terms of math, in terms of with respect to using math to examine actual returns, less than historical returns, right? And you cannot solve all those returns, you get the cumulative assessment of excess returns, right? It's a number, right? Is that all we need? Into 0, okay, 0, y. What are we actually comparing it? What are we comparing? Okay, but it's just not the cumulative returns, right? No, it's very close. 2 letters down. After R is what? 2 letters down after that. T. The T statistic. Remember that? It's the ratio of the cumulative returns to the other standard deviation. That's how you go about evaluating the next level. Okay? So when you go through this, just remind yourself that it's not just the metrics, the talk about the SCP approach, which is again kind of set it up. That we're here to explain how to use components of the SWOT analysis. So we kind of first motivated with a couple of discussions. So at the type of antitrust laws, with 3 of those, right? And I think we applied one of those to the, there's a video, I think it was the Texas Senate hearings where Senator Cruz was discussing the potential violations between the social media companies in which they could be colluding to suppress certain rights, right? So we kind of examined some of the antitrust laws with respect to that. We also talked about Obamacare, right? So the whole premise on Obamacare was to protect, was to promote a greater competitive process, which is the whole hallmark of antitrust, right? It didn't do it. Okay, so we said in class before the second exam, it did not do it because A, there's still monopolies in terms of provision of healthcare insurance. There's still one monopolies, so it hasn't solved that problem. But as a result, premiums have gone up. Would go up because of lack of competition. More fundamentally speaking, there is no requirement, or there's a mandate that requires people to buy health insurance services based on what the government asks you to do, okay? And then we talked about that, kind of a revisit of that, but last week, we're in fact that became true. In fact, it was admitted by one of the Democrat senators. Alright, so the way we go about examining, in addition to antitrust issues, is that we're also concerned about identifying opportunities. Those opportunities are not justified by market considerations with respect to addressing the needs of the market, but in terms of market structure. So this is where the residual demand elasticity and the learning index came into play. So you guys remember that, right? Okay, so the residual demand elasticity is the demand facing the residual firm, but it's a function of 3 variables. Condition to N, right? And there's no players, right? What are the 2 variables impact the residual demand elasticity? There's a table, there's a graph that I actually created for you both, right? It shows how you construct the residual demand elasticity, okay? So if you don't want to look at the equation, you can also look at the graph and help create the same kind of idea. So in addition to N, what else do we have? So which ones? The supply elasticity, right? So we've got 3, actually, well, the residual demand elasticity is a function of market demand elasticity, which is dependent on what? Number of substitutes. So more substitutes, more elastic, right? Which is distinct from the number of sellers. Please don't get those things mixed up. The number of you guys, when you're doing the second exam, got those things mixed up. Supply elasticity, what impacts supply elasticity? Certainly not the new substitutes, right? Because that's on the demand side. Specifically what cost? Right? So the more fixed cost, the more inelastic the supply schedule becomes. And so what we did is then that we kind of took this residual demand elasticity equation as well as the learning index, which is price minus marginal cost divided by price on the left-hand side, is a margin that's inversely related to residual demand elasticity. Remember that, right? So we applied that to the OPEC oil companies, remember? Right? And which was also on your exam, right? So we showed that through comparative analysis between the oil industry and the commodity industry, and all 3 key variables in terms of number of sellers, the market demand elasticity, and supply elasticity, in all 3 cases for the oil less than ethanol, right? That led to lower residual demand elasticity and as a result higher the index for those gas, which generates greater returns than the commodity. So that was the application of that. We talked about some limitations of the SCP approach, which was the demand elasticity, which it assumes what? Especially in the old coal industry. What do we have to assume in order to make this industry?
Now, companies produce the same.
That's right. So it's the little q equals big Q over N, means that on average. We'll turn to that in just a second. Okay. So then we took a framework for SCP that really kind of applied towards one of the dimensions of ag, which is that in a market structure, increasing concentration. So kind of really look at that one little statement and explain supply meat processing industry, grain processing industry, and the life science industry, all have experienced increasing concentration, but for different reasons, right? So with meat packing industry, it's due to scale. The grain processing industry is due to consolidation in the market. And lastly, the biotech industry is due to complementarities between research and development and biotech and the seed industry. So three very different reasons, but they all lead to increasing concentration. And so given what we talked about just previously, with that greater concentration, we would expect greater market power, right? Greater market power means greater lower index, greater profits. Did we observe that empirically with the meat packing industry? So remember that graph, right? The vertical axis, the price spread, horizontal axis was concentration over time. So in theory, it should go up, but in fact, empirically, it went down. So it kind of raises a big question as to how the predictive power of the model, right? That structure does not necessarily the performance for that particular case. So then we moved on to say, okay, well, maybe there's nothing really wrong with the model, but really the issue is that the way you describe structure is too coarse grained. You define structure simply with one variable, n, okay? The reason why we didn't get this kind of predictive outcome is because the n variable is not specific enough. So one way to think about this is to think about the five forces framework. So it kind of blows up the n with 5 threats. So each of these threats, by definition, a threat is anything that reduces performance. Okay? So you're expected to know, that's pretty basic, right? That's pretty obvious. So you're expected to know the hows and whys about why that's true. Okay? So for instance, if I look at the threat of entry, why is it a threat of entry? What generates a threat of entry?
High barrier costs?
No, not quite. Okay. So why is threat of entry? What's the cause of people going into the market? What generates entry? Profits, right? So what generates threat of entry is the presence of abnormal effects. Okay? So people don't go into losing industry, right? They go into industries that are profitable. So why is that a threat?
You got people that want to do the same thing.
If everyone's coming in, there's more competition, right? More competition means lower price, right? But there are factors that mitigate the threat of entry, which is very expensive, right? So even if there are profitable entry made, let's say the biotech industry, right? Or let's say you want to get to Bitcoin. I don't know if that's such a thing, but anyways, you want to get to Bitcoin, there was a lot of money to be made, right? What can you get into Bitcoin? I mean, in the early days, when you're trying to mine for the Bitcoin, it's a lot easier because there's fewer players in the market mining this stuff. Now, every one of the dogs in it. So the difficulty in getting these hash rates to get these Bitcoins becomes much harder to get. Okay? So there are barriers to entry that mitigate threat of entry. And then we also talked about other threats, threat of rivalry. What impacts threat of rivalry? So what is rivalry as opposed to entry? Existing competitors, and what drives rivalry? Large number of sellers that are selling the same product or less, slow industry growth, lack of product differentiation, right? Name a few. What about better substitutes? How do we define that relative to rivals? What's an example of substitute? Well, I think for all intents and purposes, they're calling this. What's a substitute for Coke? Still black.
Dr. Pepper.
Dr. Pepper. So, better substitute is same but different, right? So, what are the things that impact better substitutes? Relative price, good. Not the number of substitutes, right? Really important. I think we had a case that kind of elucidates that. Better supply and buyer power, we talked about. Also, for the first three, threat of entry, threat of rivalry, better substitute, these we use to understand it. What case did we use? Jam, yeah, does number those too, but before we got to that one. What about, what's that?
Wasn't it the spam?
Yeah.
Medium and scale. What was it?
The spam was like the
Like
new.
the video you showed us.
The spam was
And I think there was an
for,
article.
They had a cheaper replacement of the spam.
yeah, there was,
No entry.
yeah, so threat of, so this one's interesting, actually, think about this, the threat of, the spam one, which threats were relevant? Is that a discussion? What's that?
A lot of them, I feel like.
Okay, let's just pick the ones that really are salient. So what was the case? What was it about?
About another spam company making
Trying to get
it
into
spam.
Hawaii, right?
Mm.
So it was Tulip trying to get in to Hawaii. So what threat is that?
Entry.
Entry, right? Problem is, okay, so all these people eating spam-related products, every man and woman in China eats like 7 cans. So there's opportunity, right? Above normal returns potentially, right? So I want to get in there. I want to take 25% market share from Hormel for that, right? So he's trying to get in. Tulip's trying to get in because there's a presence of above normal returns. Is there a barrier? Well, but in that article, Tulip says, you know, it's a pretty aggressive marketing strategy, but it's going to be tough. And why is that? What was that video showing? And why it's going to make it tough to get into that market? And why is that? Brand loyalty, right? It's been there since World War II. So is that a barrier to entry?
Yes.
Yes, right? So, yeah, so that's good that you brought that up already. But point of entry would be the spam market. But the first three, when you think about the online education article, remember that one? Right? Whether we, well, ask you guys to assess the competitive environment for higher education between teaching in class and online, right? So is online a rival or to teaching in class? What is it? It's a substitute. Why? I mean, it's the same, right?
Same but different.
But is it different?
Yeah.
I think most of us can conclude after concluding that it is different. Whether it's better or worse, I don't know, but it is different. So that's the case. Those two cases kind of illustrate the first three elements, and then we kind of round it off the supply and buyer power, name that kind of builds off the IO approach to ag, buyer concentration, supply concentration. That falls right out of the SAP approach. There's some other additional elements too, but those are the key ones that come out of that discussion. So with that, we had 5 threats, and then we kind of applied this to the sweet jam case, right? So the sweet jam case, again, when we do our plan work, not all threats necessarily matter, right? You gotta work on focus on only those threats that you've got evidence in support of, right? Because otherwise you're gonna be developing strategies for threats that don't even exist, right? You gotta be astute in identifying those threats. So in the case of the sweet jam situation, what were the key threats? So we got a whole bunch of different alternatives to the sweet jam. We've got the high fruit, low sugar jam, we've got the marmalade, we've got the chocolate spread, we've got the honey, etc., right? So therefore, there must be better substitutes, right? Yes or no? What did you just say? What did you say a few minutes ago about that? So what is the impact? Is the number of substitutions it doesn't make it, right? So threat of suppliers, substitutes not an issue. What about threat of entry? Again, we said threat of entry driven by the president about no more terms. How many of you would want to get into this initiative? For the sweet jam industry? Yeah. You want to be, okay. Okay. So, all right, but in the case, there's some concern in this industry because most of the purchases are made by mothers for the kids, right? And what was the concern there? Health considerations. There was concern that kids are getting low fat, and so that really kind of tackles the profitability you have in that industry. So it's not that, then what is it then? What about suppliers? So you're making jam, right? So you're gonna get sugar and fruit. So let's say fruit. Are there gonna be an issue from sourcing fruit? I mean, is it concentrated? Sure, okay, but where are the places we get our fruit?
Mexico.
Mexico, Florida,
California.
Texas, is good, as well as California, and further South America. A whole bunch of places. So we could deal with seasonality by sourcing different places. That's not gonna be an issue, right? So then what remains is bartering. Is that a problem?
Yeah.
Okay, not a problem? So what does it say in the case? What impacts rivalry? Existing firms, so they're probably Smuckers versus Welch, and who else, but what else?
Slow industry growth.
Is it slow?
Yes.
Yeah, and why is that? Because people don't want to eat unhealthy products, right? Slow industry growth, and what about, is it a differentiated product? No, because you can tell, because why? What's the spending on advertising like for this industry?
Non-existent.
Non-existent, 73% decline, right? And industry growth is 0.5% every year, right? So we know threat of robbery is a big problem, okay? What about supply power? Buyer power, sorry. We're talking buyers in terms of moms?
Yeah.
No, so remember, we're looking at it from the standpoint of a sweet jam producer, right? So you're selling your jam eventually to mothers, but it has to go through food. Supermarket, grocery store, HEB, right? Is that market concentrated? Like they say it's controlled by the major multiples. You in fact have to pay for shelf space, right? So the two key threats in that industry are going to be rivalry and buyer power, as supported by vacuum. That talks about how to go about developing strategy, generic strategies, cost leadership, differentiation, and some combination of those with respect to focus becoming leader. Both of those together, okay? And in the context of the sweet jam industry, you can't do cost leadership. Of course, the focus is going to be mom, right? You can't do cost leadership. Why? Well, even if you could, what is the future prognosis of this industry? Healthy, and then are there positions for that? No. For the sweet jam? No, right? So no matter how much you double down and increase the capacity cost leadership, you're going down a dead end road because the market's not going to support it, right? All right. Then we kind of moved on to resource-based view, in which we have different assumptions from what we've had so far. The rest of the assumptions that a firm's resources are heterogeneous. Given what we've talked about so far, why is that important? By assuming resource heterogeneous and costly to imitate, how is that different from what we've exposed so far? And what are the implications of that? So remember, the residual demand analysis is based on what assumption? All firms are the same, right? Q is equal to big Q over N. If all firms are the same, can the IO approach explain differences in performance based on assumption? No, absolutely no. So the contribution of the resource-based view is uniquely tailored to examine firm-level differences that so far none of them think we can explain. So, given those assumptions, we could say that there are different types of resources, financial, fiscal, and organizational. As we go through the solution key in the sweet jam and then the Starbucks case, it lays out the degree to which each of these assets are valuable or custom case. Everything we've done so far only examines one type of asset at a time. Okay? So that one gives kind of a nice overview of all those. Went through earlier each of these questions to help us define what is competitive advantage. Okay? Value of resources generates some opportunity, respond to some need as well as threats. Rarity is how many other firms have that particular resource, and inimitability, again, just to be clear. Dealing with resources eventually will be imitated. The question is how costly. That's the operative question. And lastly, is the organization structured in a way that exploits that? So we've got various cases here. I'm going to have you read the remaining ones, the last two slides yourself. Cover various cases to illustrate the resource-based view, the new technology case, the Cinemex, where you kind of check display narrative and then trick your Facebook to get the suite of the next year on. That's one example. The marsupial coffee, right? We also talked about the engineering a safer burger that emphasizes the plant asset. And then lastly, the TV case. Remember that one? And what's going on with that? Oh, that was last week. What is the resource there? The 3D is valuable. Why? Look, it saves water too, right? It's a rare. Because he was asked, is this the only in the market? Should be true. Because it costs to imitate. It's $2.99, so it must not be costly to imitate, right? It's got a pack, okay? So because of those things, if you invest because it'll generate one level of performance.
That's right.
Above normal, but also what? Sustained, okay? Alright, so it looks like I got 2 minutes left. Any further questions before we wrap up? Okay, what was your?
Are we gonna do
Take what you need.
Are we going to do those proofs, like on the second test, put it back around now?
All I can say is 65% of exams is going to be the new material. Take one. And if you're going to use the old book, you're probably 2 hours. Joey, yeah.
So like, just like.
All the point, no.
Okay.
Pretty much done. Everything's
No,
done.
you're good, you're good.
Okay, no further questions.
Is this your last question?
Yes, sir. Yeah. No, you're good.